My husband slapped me and slammed me against the wall during my birthday, but with that he signed his own divorce papers. Smack. That was the sound that echoed through the grand ballroom, right on my birthday. For a split second, the world went silent. Glasses froze midair, a fork clattered to the floor, and I could swear even the jazz band stopped playing. My cheek burned like fire, but what burned hotter was the shame. My husband, Ethan, had just slapped me across the face in front of everyone we knew. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. It was supposed to be my 29th birthday celebration, hosted in the same hotel where we'd had our wedding reception 4 years earlier. He wanted to relive the memory, he said. I thought it was sweet. Until that night. I remember holding my champagne glass, smiling at the guests, thanking everyone for coming. Then I saw Ethan walking toward me, jaw tight, eyes cold. I thought maybe he was just nervous, he hated crowds. But then, he leaned close, whispering in my ear, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Before I could smile, his hand flew across my face. I stumbled back, crashing into a table. My ears rang. Gasps filled the room. For a moment, I didn't move. Everyone was staring, my parents, my friends, even his business partners. He barked out, "Maybe next time you'll learn to respect your husband." And that's when I did something that no one expected. I laughed. Not a nervous giggle. Not a cry disguised as laughter. But a calm, confident, steady laugh that sliced through the air like glass breaking. Everyone froze. Ethan's face twisted in confusion. "What the hell is so funny, Lena?" I stood up straight, wiped a drop of blood from my lip, and looked him dead in the eye. "Oh, Ethan," I said quietly. "You just gave me the best birthday gift of my life." The guests began whispering, phones recording. My mother gasped, "Lena, don't." But I didn't care anymore. For years, I'd lived in the shadow of that man, the charming businessman who looked perfect on paper, who everyone said I was lucky to have. They didn't see the cracks behind the mansion walls. They didn't see the emotional bruises, the insults whispered in private, the nights he made me cry myself to sleep. But now they saw him for what he really was. And they were about to see me, the woman he thought was weak, become the one thing he feared most, a woman with nothing left to lose. I stood there, smiling calmly, while he fumed. "You're humiliating yourself, Lena," he spat. "No," I said softly. "You just did that for me." He tried to grab my arm, but before he could, I turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said with a steady voice, "I want to thank my husband for tonight's performance. It's the perfect ending to the story I've been writing for the last 6 months." Whispers rippled through the room. "Story? What story?" someone murmured. Ethan's face turned pale. "Lena, what are you talking about?" I leaned close to him, my voice just loud enough for everyone to hear. "You'll find out tomorrow morning," I said, "right after the news breaks." And with that, I placed my champagne glass on the table, turned, and walked out of my own birthday party. The sound of my heels against the marble floor echoed through the silence. Click, 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 until the ballroom doors shut behind me. That night, as I sat in the back of a cab, watching the city lights blur through my tears, I smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared. Because Ethan didn't know that for 6 months, I'd been quietly documenting everything, the emotional abuse, the affairs, the secret offshore accounts he thought I didn't know about. And tonight's slap? That was just the final signature I needed, the proof that would bring his empire crashing down. As the cab sped through the rainy streets, I whispered to myself, "Happy birthday, Lena. Time to take back your life." After I left the ballroom, I didn't go home. I went to the one place no one would expect, the small downtown apartment I'd rented in secret for work projects. It was a plain place with a tiny kitchenette, but it had a lock on the door and a drawer full of things Ethan would never suspect I owned. Documents, digital backups, printouts, and notes I had painstakingly gathered over the last 6 months. When we tied the knot, people assumed my life had become seamless. But marriage didn't erase the part of me that had always been practical. I still had a brain for details and enough patience to follow a thread until it unraveled. After the first year of marriage, I started to notice inconsistencies: a credit card charge that didn't line up, a late-night email that made my stomach drop, a checkbook entry that was too neat to be honest. I could have confronted him then. I could have begged and cried. Instead, I did the one thing that finally felt like power. I documented everything. I kept a digital diary, not of feelings but of facts. Dates, names, bank transfers, screenshots of flirtatious messages, copies of contracts signed in his shaky office handwriting, receipts from hotels in cities he wasn't supposed to be in. When I confronted him once about a suspicious charge, he smiled and called me paranoid. I smiled back and kept collecting evidence. So that night, after the slap and the applause of gossip, I sat at the tiny kitchen table and laid out the pieces. There were emails saved to a secure cloud account. There were photographs of documents I'd discreetly photographed over breakfast conversations when he left his laptop open. I had statements from a former assistant who'd been quietly fired for budget cuts. I had whisper-thin threads that, when woven together, painted a picture of a man whose empire was built on charm, intimidation, and a string of ethical compromises. But documentation alone wasn't enough. I needed leverage. I needed an audience that couldn't be bought with his money or gaslit by his charisma. I needed people whose jobs depended on truth: lawyers, journalists, auditors. So over 6 months, I made cautious, anonymous calls. An encrypted tip to a local investigative reporter. A meeting with an attorney who specialized in corporate fraud. A secured transfer of copies of accounting irregularities to a regulator. Each contact was a pebble on a path I walked with deliberate steps. When the slap happened, it wasn't a dramatic outburst to punish him for my own humiliation. It was confirmation. A final, undeniable act that exposed how he reacted when his control was threatened. He had shown for everyone the true face he saved for private moments. In his arrogance, he thought it was private no more. He didn't know I had people waiting, not to pounce, but to receive evidence and verify it. He didn't know that a respected journalist I'd fed small clues to had been intrigued and was now preparing to dig deeper. The next morning, after a night of restless sleep and little sleep at all, I checked my inbox. 200 messages. Calls. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. My mother, sobbing, asking what had happened. I let the messages sit. Panic in other people's voices is delicious only when you need them to step aside and let the truth move forward. I had to be precise. If I rushed, he'd have time to smear me. If I delayed, he'd find a way to bury the facts. So I made a plan to control the narrative. First, secure myself and the kids, if there were kids in our story. Luckily for me, Ethan and I did not share children. It simplified a painful part of such battles and kept the focus where I wanted it, on truth and consequences. Second, make him vulnerable in the very places he thought were bulletproof: his business, his reputation, his partnerships. Third, ensure the truth reached the right people at the right time, so his usual defense mechanisms, charm, legal threats, gaslighting, would be insufficient. I met the investigative reporter in a crowded cafe 2 days later, hands wrapped around a coffee cup because it made me seem casual. She had a calm face and an even voice and asked questions that were surgical. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "Not memories. Documents." I slid over a flash drive embedded with months of carefully labeled files, and she lifted her eyebrows, respectful and appraising. "You understand the fallout if we run this?" I did. I had rehearsed it 1,000 times in the mirror. Fame and scandal can do more than shame. They can obliterate lives. But Ethan had already been obliterating mine in small, repetitive acts for years. His structure of power was built up where others would not look. For every move I made, I kept a backdoor. I set up legal representation in a different city under a false name. I arranged for a secure bank account to be ready. I booked a private investigator to quietly check on his background and insurance records. I fed information gradually, allowing professional curiosity to be piqued without giving away my entire hand. This was chess, not wrestling. Meanwhile, at home, He moved like a man who had no idea what was coming. He apologized to friends, saying I'd been emotional, that it was a moment of stress. He texted mutual acquaintances, trying to control the ripples. He called me, begging me to come back. He wanted to keep the marriage on its public pedestal, and I realized how much of his identity depended on appearances. The more he scrambled to maintain them, the easier it was for me to push. In the quiet moments, I felt awed, not triumphant, not vengeful exactly. I felt like someone who had finally stopped being a witness in her own life. There was sorrow, of course. Tears still came in quieter hours, not at the party's grandeur but late at night when a song on the radio pulled me back to better beginnings. But beneath the sorrow was a hardening resolve. I wasn't just proving him wrong. I was proving to myself that I could build a life that didn't hinge on his approval. When the reporter called a week later to say she was ready to publish an initial piece exposing financial discrepancies and allegations of misconduct, I scheduled the release for a Tuesday morning. It was arbitrary, but I liked the symmetry, exposing a man on a plain weekday, not on some dramatic anniversary he could prepare for. I had counsel on standby, and the regulatory agency I'd contacted had confirmed an inquiry would follow. The pieces were in motion. The build-up wasn't just about stacking evidence. It was about staking a claim to my own life. The slap had been his attempt to remind me who I was, but instead, he'd reminded me who I could be. Someone who could turn humiliation into leverage and betrayal into liberation. And as the day approached when the story would go live, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't doing it purely for revenge. I was doing it so that Lena, could be free, not just from his hands, but from the fear I had lived with for so long. The morning the article went live, I woke up before dawn. My phone was already buzzing on the nightstand like a trapped insect, constant vibrations that didn't stop. I didn't check it immediately. I sat by the window, sipping cold coffee and listening to the faint hum of the city below. The sun was just rising, turning the skyline orange and pink, and I remember thinking, that's what freedom must look like, soft and steady, not loud and sudden. When I finally opened my phone, the screen exploded with notifications. Headlines filled my feed. Businessman Ethan Cole under investigation for fraud and domestic abuse allegations. Wife breaks silence. Hidden documents expose financial crimes. From luxury to lies. The fall of a power couple. My name was everywhere. My face, too. A photo from one of our charity galas, smiling beside the man who'd humiliated me in front of everyone. Except this time, the captions didn't read, "loving wife," or "perfect couple." They read, "the woman who brought him down." Within hours, Ethan's world started collapsing. The company board issued a public statement, announcing an emergency meeting to review serious allegations. His business partners distanced themselves faster than lightning. His PR manager quit. And his lawyer, the one he'd used to intimidate others, refused to represent him. Everything he'd built on image and fear was crumbling, piece by piece. He called me dozens of times that day. I didn't answer. When his calls turned to messages, I finally opened one. "You think you've won? You've ruined us both." I typed slowly.
No, Ethan.
"You ruined yourself." I just stopped hiding it. Then I blocked him. The real storm, though, wasn't in the news. It was inside the people who'd always believed in his perfection. Friends started reaching out with mixed emotions: shock, sympathy, guilt. One of them, Marissa, called crying. "Lena, I swear I didn't know. He told us you were unstable." I didn't blame her. That's how men like him survive, by painting their victims as hysterical. But now, for the first time, my story was louder than his lies. By afternoon, reporters camped outside his company building. The media loved the dual narrative: the glamorous husband with a hidden temper and the wife who turned her pain into evidence. But fame is a dangerous thing. The public's sympathy can twist quickly into obsession. Strangers messaged me, some cheering me on, others accusing me of exaggerating. That's when I realized justice isn't clean. It's messy and public, and it asks for a piece of you in return. Still, I didn't flinch. Every headline that exposed his lies felt like a stitch healing a wound. Every mention of my name next to the word survivor instead of wife felt like oxygen returning to my lungs. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to fight back. He went live on social media, his face pale, voice trembling as he tried to deny the allegations. "My wife is mentally unwell," he said. "She's doing this for attention." But people had seen the video of him slapping me. The one a guest had leaked anonymously to the press. The sound of that slap echoed across the internet, replayed in slow motion, becoming the undeniable proof he could never erase. His words bounced back at him like rubber bullets. Soon after, regulators froze his accounts. The company's stocks plummeted. Former employees started coming forward with their own stories: unpaid overtime, harassment, manipulation. The man who had once looked untouchable was now drowning in the very spotlight he used to crave. I remember sitting in my small apartment again, watching the news coverage. The same journalists who had once praised his business genius were now dissecting his downfall. My heart didn't race with joy. It was calmer than ever. This wasn't revenge fueled by hate anymore. It was justice delivered with precision. A week later, he showed up at my door. I heard the knock and froze. Then came his voice, quiet, hoarse, desperate. "Lena, please. Just let me explain." I didn't open the door, but I spoke through it. "There's nothing left to explain, Ethan. You showed the world who you are." He let out a bitter laugh. "You think they care about you? They'll move on in a week. But me? I'm finished." I hesitated. His voice cracked when he said my name again, not with anger this time, but with regret. "Was it worth it?" he whispered. I took a deep breath. Every second. Then I heard him walk away. Slow, defeated steps down the hallway, the sound of a man realizing that all his power had finally run out. That night, I sat in silence. My heart was heavy, but it wasn't broken anymore. It was rebuilding. For years, I had thought strength meant staying quiet. That night, I realized true strength sometimes means burning down the cage that kept you silent. The next morning, my story became part of a larger movement online. Women shared their own experiences under a new hashtag that the reporter had started. #HerTurnToSpeak. My inbox filled with messages from strangers, women who said my courage gave them the push they needed to walk away, to gather proof, to believe their own truth. Ethan's empire was gone. His friends abandoned him. His reputation? Unsalvageable.
But mine?
For the first time, I had one that belonged only to me. And yet, deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. People like him never give up control easily. They try to rebuild in the shadows. Which meant that if I wanted peace, I had to make sure he could never touch me, not financially, not legally, not emotionally, ever again. And that's exactly what I plan to do next. They say the loudest moment of a collapse is the sound of the last piece hitting the floor. For Ethan, that sound was the scraping of a pen across paper. After the stories, the investigations, and the boardroom chaos, his world narrowed down to one desperate meeting. An emergency board session called by his largest investors convened to decide whether the company should try to weather the storm or cut their losses. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I drove past the building and watched from my car as a swarm of black SUVs pulled up, law firms, journalists, creditors. The air felt electric, like the pause before lightning. I didn't go in as a vengeful wife. I went in as a stakeholder in the truth I'd built. My attorney and I had arranged to be there in case the board tried to gaslight their way into another miracle. My attorney wore a calm face. That steadiness steadied me. Inside, Ethan looked smaller than the man I'd married. The suit hung off him, his jaw unshaven, as if he'd forgotten the ritual of dignity. He glared when he saw me, but there was fear there now, raw and thin. The board wasted no time. The lead investor, a woman named Claire who had once praised Ethan at conferences, cut straight to the point. "Mr. Cole," she said, "we need assurances now. Can you provide instant access to the company's books and an independent audit? Can you guarantee continuity?" Her tone carried the kind of impatience that had once been my only edge when dealing with him. He stammered, tried to joke.
It didn't land.
That's when the lawyer representing the regulatory agency cleared his throat and asked for permission to proceed with some questions. Ethan's face drained. He had bills he'd hoped were buried. He had partners who were angry and lawyers circling like vultures. The CEO who'd once charmed everyone into compliance suddenly had none of those cushions left. Ethan tried to stall. "We'll handle it internally," he said, voice thin. The board exchanged looks. "We need something concrete," Claire snapped. "Sign these interim transfer papers to allow a temporary, independent board to take control while auditors do their job." The lawyers slid the documents across the table. They were standard corporate emergency instruments: transfer of executive control to a temporary committee, emergency powers to stabilize operations, and authorization to release funds only under oversight. My stomach tightened. These were the tools that could save the company, or doom a man. Ethan glanced at the documents, then at me. "I won't let them take this from me," he said. "This is my life." He reached for the pen in a motion that looked like reclaiming a throne. What happened next was almost unbearably cinematic. I'd prepared for this. Not with coercion, but with leverage so bulletproof that even his bravado couldn't dodge it. My attorney stood and, with a calm I envied, said, "Mr. Cole, the public records show a slew of transfers to shell entities that were discovered by our auditors prior to this meeting. If the board does not act now, we will be compelled to notify the regulatory authorities and file criminal referrals. That will trigger asset freezes independent of your control." Ethan's hand hesitated over the pen. Sweat beaded at his temple. The room hummed with the gravity of consequences. He had two choices: sign and allow the company to be stabilized under oversight, effectively surrendering hands-on control for the time being, or refuse and have external authorities step in, which would likely mean immediate freezes, emergency receivership, and criminal exposure. Either way, his empire was unraveling. Signing would be an implicit, painful admission that the company no longer belonged to him alone. He stared at the signatures for a long beat. Then, as if the slap at the birthday party had reduced him to an animal making a last, frantic choice to survive, he signed. The pen scratch echoed in the room like a judge's gavel. With that single motion, the board activated the interim committee. I felt the universe shift. The documents transferred executive authority to a temporary board in which my attorney had negotiated a seat representing victim interests and corporate integrity. In short, the power to guide the company away from him had legally been placed into hands that would block his unilateral actions. He had, by his own hand, signed away the control he'd used to hide his mess. Ethan stood, a look of numb disbelief on his face. The lead investor rose slowly. "We intend to cooperate with regulators," she said, "and we'll be transparent about all findings." Someone from his legal team whispered a warning, but the words were small and powerless in that room. All the PR coaches in the world could not erase the pen marks on those pages. Outside the room, cameras flashed and reporters jostled for an angle. A union of former employees and vendors gathered in the lobby holding placards that read things like, "Accountability now." Men like Ethan build bulletproof facades by convincing others that the man behind it knows best. But even bulletproof has seams. As the interim committee began to outline steps, forensic audits, temporary CFO installation, freezing suspicious accounts pending investigation, helicopters of consequence hovered above his life. The regulators called their subpoenas within hours. His bank accounts were flagged. Partners began drafting withdrawal notices. His phone buzzed endlessly with calls from investors, lawyers, and eventually from law enforcement arranging interviews. I watched him from the back of the room as the reality of his choices settled in. He mouthed something incoherent. I couldn't tell if it was an apology or an accusation. Mostly, it didn't matter. The man who had once used appearances to govern reality now watched his fate be determined in documents his own hand had bound him to. By the time I left the building, the board had issued a holding statement. The company would continue operations, but leadership would be accountable to an independent audit. Investors had placed contingencies. Most importantly for me, the interim committee had the authority to limit his access to company funds and to negotiate settlements with victims, including me. That evening, The first wire transfers were frozen. The first subpoenas were served. The first headlines had the nervous bite of finality. The slap at the party had been a physical mark. The pen had been the legal one. Between the two, a fall from grace had been sealed. I went home that night feeling the strange fatigue of someone who'd done the right thing and watched justice, messy and imperfect, take its course. Ethan called once, twice, and I let it go to voicemail. He would learn in the courts and, in the press, what I hadn't been able to tell him in private, that his actions had consequences far beyond a bruised cheek. The climax wasn't a dramatic shout or a courtroom confession. It was quieter, a signature on paper that made it possible for regulators and the law to finish what I'd started. He had signed the instrument of his own loss. And in doing so, he had given me what I'd always wanted, a chance to live free from his control. The following weeks felt like waking up after a long, painful storm. Everything was quieter. Not peaceful yet, but still. Reporters stopped calling. My face slowly disappeared from headlines, replaced by fresher scandals. But for once, I didn't care about the silence. It was mine. Ethan's life unraveled completely. The interim board turned over findings to regulators, who confirmed what I already knew. Money had been siphoned through fake vendors, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, and funds wired offshore. Within a month, subpoenas arrived. His name was dragged through hearings, depositions, and televised investigations. He tried to make public statements, but every time he opened his mouth, recordings, emails, or witnesses emerged to contradict him. His empire was gone brick by brick, deal by deal. I didn't celebrate his downfall with champagne or laughter. I watched it unfold with the same stillness I'd shown when he first hit me. Because this wasn't about watching him suffer. It was about no longer being afraid. One afternoon, my lawyer called with an update. The board voted to approve the settlement package, she said. You'll be compensated for the damages, and your name will be cleared in all corporate records. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the sunlight streaming through my window. Compensation was nice, but closure was priceless. Ethan reached out one last time before the trial began. Not to threaten, not to plead, but to meet. Against my lawyer's advice, I agreed. I needed to look him in the eyes one last time and close the door myself. We met at a small cafe, neutral ground, public enough to be safe. He looked different. The arrogant gleam that once defined him was gone. His expensive suit looked too big on his shoulders. His voice, once commanding, was hollow. "Lena," he said, almost whispering. "I've lost everything." I stirred my coffee, calm.
No, Ethan.
You lost control. There's a difference. He swallowed hard, eyes wet. I didn't mean to hurt you like that. I was angry, embarrassed. I thought you'd forgive me. I looked at him, the man who had slapped me in front of a crowd to prove power, who thought forgiveness was just another form of surrender. You thought wrong, I said softly.
You didn't break me that night.
You woke me up. He leaned back, defeated. I never thought you'd be capable of this. I smiled faintly. Neither did I. But sometimes, all it takes is one slap to realize who's been holding the weapon all along. He stared down at his hands, shaking. They're going to destroy me.
No, Iraplia.
You did that. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just nodded, the gesture of a man who finally understood there was no one left to blame but himself. When I stood to leave, he didn't stop me. I walked out of that cafe into a crisp, bright morning, and for the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. Over the next few months, I started rebuilding. I found a small place by the coast, where I could write and breathe without looking over my shoulder. I went back to school to finish my degree in finance. Ironic, maybe, but fitting. I wanted to understand the system that had once trapped me. The same investigative reporter who'd broken Ethan's story invited me to collaborate on a feature about women who expose financial abuse. I agreed, not for fame, but to help others find their own exits. Every once in a while, people would still recognize me. The woman from the viral article, the one who took down her husband. They'd whisper or smile, and I'd nod politely. But I wasn't the woman who exposed him anymore. I was just Lena, alive, working, free. The last piece of the puzzle came in the mail one spring morning, a notice that Ethan had accepted a plea deal. He'd avoid a long prison sentence by cooperating and paying restitution. When I read the letter, I felt nothing. No hatred. No triumph. Just release. The kind that lets you breathe deeper than you ever have before. I drove to the beach that evening. The tide was rolling in, gentle and endless. I stood barefoot in the sand, the water kissing my ankles. For years, I'd stood still while storms raged around me. But this time, the storm had passed and the quiet didn't scare me. It felt like peace. I thought about that night, my birthday, the slap, the shock of it. The way everyone had gasped and turned away. I had turned away too, for years. But not anymore. I had faced everything, his violence, his deceit, my own fear, and I had survived it all. People say revenge is about destruction. They're wrong. Real revenge is rebirth. It's taking back your narrative, one truth at a time. It's turning humiliation into power, silence into testimony. It's not about ruining them. It's about restoring yourself. As the sun sank into the horizon, I whispered a quiet thank you, not to him, but to the woman I had become. The woman who didn't need anyone's permission to exist. I smiled then. Not the forced smile of a wife in public. A real one, small, free, and alive. Because that night, Ethan may have slapped me. But with that slap, he didn't break me. He signed the contract of his own destruction. And I signed the beginning of my freedom.